Hi everybody, my name is Mike King. I'm an instructor here at Berklee Online, and we're lucky to have two drummers join us today for discussion on entrepreneurship. So we're here with Peter Gotcher, who founded DigiDesign in 1984, served as its president, CEO, and chairman. He's currently the executive chairman at Dolby, chairman of Topspin, board member and early investor at Pandora. You're also an early investor at Netflix and TiVo.
Yes.
And most importantly, Berklee College of Music trustee.
There
and
you go.
Also here with Roger Brown, president at Berklee, who also has a real rich entrepreneurial background. You co-founded Bright Horizons in 1986, which currently has 22,000 employees in 5 countries and a market cap of $2.3 billion. My son is there, and it's a great experience for he and I both. So, you know, we're going to have a conversation on entrepreneurship. We're going to cover a lot of different ground. I want to start with you, Roger. So from your standpoint, how does somebody get started with getting an entrepreneurial idea off of the ground? What's most important?
To me, the great thing about entrepreneurship is the capacity to imagine something that doesn't exist, to work really hard, and then if you're successful, not only does it exist, it actually serves people, serves a need. So there's the magic of entrepreneurship is just incredible. You know, so many people in the world complain or whine about things they don't like, and entrepreneurs just go fix things and start things that work. To me, I think one of the things where we got lucky, I think most entrepreneurs, if they're honest, would admit there's a lot of luck and a lot of timing and things out of your control. You're usually young when you start. There's a lot you don't know, but we got lucky because we were providing a service that helped working couples. And it was a period in the United States when more and more husbands and wives were both choosing to be in the workplace, so they needed good child care, and they wanted educational, high-quality child care. So I guess the one conclusion I have is, in addition to all the other things you need to be successful, it helps if the world wants and needs what you have now, and 5 years from now it's going to want and need even more of that. So there's a wave you're riding of the growth of something, and sometimes it's a disruptive technology that you figure out, and Peter's been a master of some of those. Other times it's just a societal, cultural change that you can take advantage of.
So would you say the number one thing would be timing overall?
I don't know if that's the right term. You can certainly have bad timing. I guess the number one thing overall in my mind is there a wave of change that causes what you're doing to be needed in the world? And are you there early enough to take advantage of that, but not so early that you're on your surfboard for like 10 or 15 years of your life waiting for that wave to come?
Right. Peter, you have a great background with technology-focused companies. Does what Roger say work with you in technology and, you know, trying to be, you know, at the right place at the right time?
Yes, but it's not something you can control.
Yeah.
I've seen this time and time again. I have friends who are very bright, successful, and decide it's time to be an entrepreneur, so they'll say, what's the best available idea now? And that often fails. The better catalyst, I think, for being an entrepreneur is, in my case, it's often been, I really want this, it doesn't exist. I'm pretty confident I'm not the only one who wants it. If you go back to the founding of DigiDesign, I mean, I was a completely accidental entrepreneur. I was 23 years old. I had a job I really liked. I was happy, but went out and bought one of the first digital drum machines, and I hated the sounds. And I said, you know, I love the programmability. I want to change these sounds. And I, with my co-founder, you know, we hacked the drum machine, but just for ourselves, and showed it to the company that made the drum machine. And they said, wow, this is way better, way more variety of sounds. And we suddenly had a company, brought it to market, and sold, you know, hundreds of thousands of these things. And that was the funding money for DigiDesign, and, you know, got us to the next stage. But there was no master plan. I think Roger's got a really good point. There's a lot of revisionist history with successful entrepreneurs if they had it all figured out. It's generally be opportunistic. You know, when you have that aha moment that, you know, I would really love, I wish this existed. You know, and there's variations on that.
Right.
The ability and to be opportunistic when opportunity knocks, it's not always on convenient timing for you. It's, you know, you need to be willing to take risks often, and sometimes you can do it without leaving your existing job. But, you know, that's more important as a catalyst for getting an entrepreneurial idea off the ground. And then you start needing to answer all the questions around what does it take to make this a reality? And different ideas require very different things in terms of people, funding. Are you solving fundamental technology problems that are very hard and unpredictable to solve? There's a lot of elements that go into how you get it off the ground.
Can we talk a little bit more about that? It's a little bit of a mystery to me. At what point do you look for funding? At what point do you determine that your idea is viable, and you try to, say, I'm going to go for it and make it, try to make this as big as possible?
Yeah. One thing that's changed in the last, gotta hate to think how long I've been doing this, the last 20 years or so is it used to be that most ideas that were technology products required substantial professional funding, right? You needed venture capital, and if you're going to go innovate, make a new kind of disk drive, or those things are all capital intensive. And there are a lot of startup ideas in the music space that are capital intensive for totally different reasons. I want to go launch another music streaming service, and it requires direct licenses from the labels, and they all want advances, and that might be a different reason why a business would be capital intensive. But the good news today is, a lot of these startups can be funded in creative ways at low levels to kind of prove the concept and get through validation stages without a lot of money in the company, and often without professional capital. If your idea can be expressed in an app that's much lower cost of development, often you can find people to collaborate with on it, and so you can get to. It used to be, all right, if we're going to undertake this, we're going to need at least X million dollars at the start, and so you'd go out and you'd need to be connected to VCs to pitch them to raise that money. Now there's so many other options, from Kickstarter to things like Angel List is a really popular place now for people raising angel rounds from people they don't know. It's always the friends and family route, but with friends and family, you got to remember that there's a high mortality rate on all startups. Just the nature of being an entrepreneur is that a lot of them have failed multiple times before they get their hit, and sometimes it's better to lose strangers' money that phase.
And I would add that Peter and I are sort of the exception to the rule. Most entrepreneurs don't start companies that become really big. Most of them would start like a digital marketing agency, and they'd have 25 people, and they'd run a great business, and they would never need capital. They might borrow a little money, or they rent some space from someone, or managers of bands, or most entrepreneurs actually start what I think you'd call more cottage industries. Restaurateurs don't all become Red Lobster or Burger King. Most of them run really nice local restaurants and earn a fine living that way. So I think I've seen entrepreneurs have really good ideas that work at that stage, and then they think, oh, let me raise $5 million and turn it into something big, and they destroy the whole thing because it was never meant to be a global institution. It was meant to be a boutique that does great work and earns a fine living for the people who work there.
I've seen that many times too, Roger. Somebody will say, we're going to go raise as much money as we can from a top VC, and then that by definition is you're signing up to go for swing for the fences and try to get the biggest possible outcome, and it's often incompatible with the nature of the opportunity.
Yeah.
Is there an intermediate phase? And you mentioned Kickstarter, which I think is interesting. So when I teach music business courses, I talk about the importance of leverage and illustrating that you have a fan base before you do other things. Could the same concept be true for entrepreneurs, and would Kickstarter be an example that you could show a VC to say, hey, I've got interest here, we generated this amount through Kickstarter, and we're looking for this, and we think we can do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kickstarter is not just a fundraising mechanism, it's a market validation mechanism too. I mean, you get a bunch of people, typically, being a Kickstarter supporter involves getting the product, or at the end of the day, and so that's that's kind of you can do market research and ask people if they'll buy something, but there's no substitute, and they will often there'll be a bias towards saying yes, but there's nothing like that's where the rubber really meets the road if they're committing money to your project.
And some of these Kickstarter deals where people are buying things that don't even exist yet, that's even better than saying it exists. Would you buy it? If people were willing to take a flyer on you, that's a cool thing. And then things like Pledge Music, which I think were started by Berklee alums.
That's right.
Are trying to bring that concept in an even more focused way to music. So certainly, I mean, I guess probably Peter would agree with me. If you don't need to raise institutional venture capital, don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It brings a lot of costs and lack of control and other complications. So if there's a way, if you're trying to write an app try to not need money to do that. Try to write it and then try to see if anyone likes it and uses it, and then figure out how big is this meant to be? How do I monetize it? But
and one of the challenges with things, on the one hand, the low cost and barrier to entry to create, a product like an app is great, but everybody else is in the same boat, so it's a very noisy world. I mean, the number of apps being released every day, and is huge. And so, the question is, how do you get above the noise and get some trial and some traction with users? And I think that's becoming increasingly hard, and it's it's very difficult and inefficient to try to use traditional marketing techniques, for that kind of a product, and that's expensive as well. So, being really clever with social marketing techniques and being really clever with finding ways to amplify word of mouth, because it's also, I think, for younger generations, I think there's an inherent skepticism of traditional marketing as well, and you really want to hear about it from your friends or from trusted sources.
It's true, it's shifted, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the downside of VCs, or the potential downside of VCs. Can you go into more detail about that?
Peter alluded to one of the points. Well, first, I had a great experience with venture capitalists, and our idea was the right idea for them, and we didn't raise too much money, but inherently, a venture capitalist is going to make money by having an idea that becomes a very big idea. So if your idea was not meant to be a very big idea, and you bring in venture capitalists, they're going to want you to swing for the fences, which means hiring an expensive management team and taking big risks. And then if it doesn't work, the whole thing can be vaporized. And what could have been a really successful medium-sized business doesn't exist at all.
That's really smart.
And then, of course, most venture capitalists want some control. So if they don't, I almost got fired once by the investors in my company. I dodged that bullet, but they had the right to fire me. It was their company. They own the majority of it. So, if you've got a really good idea and a lot of track record and a bunch of customers, you may not need to give away control. But typically, especially if it's a startup, they're not going to give you control. So, and often they have a lot of advice. Sometimes it's really helpful advice. Sometimes it's contradictory. Sometimes you don't agree with it. So it's, it just creates a whole additional set of complexities in an early time when you want to be as focused and committed to the idea as you possibly can be. And then a lot of people end up spending most of their time not running their businesses but raising more money and dealing with all that. So
having venture investors can be high maintenance. There are some that are great. There are many that are hugely taxing on the entrepreneur and management for their own comfort, not for any real benefit to you. And if your interests are misaligned in terms, they are. You don't want to make a mistake. They are financial investors. They're not there because they share your vision for how to change the world for the benefit of your customers. And so, if that creates a great financial opportunity, they'll ride that. But at the point that there's friction between the financial outcome and your vision of what you want your company to be, including culturally, that's there's many tales told of that. Of becoming really problematic.
No, it's interesting. TuneCore went through some changes recently. So along those lines, how long do VCs or other folks give a business until they kind of pull the plug or stop investing? And the reason I ask, if I think about Sirius Radio, they were founded in 1990. I don't think they became profitable until 2006, and they got a ton of money. So what goes into that decision-making process?
That is so variable by circumstances. There's situations where VCs will develop a vested interest in the company not failing, because of the impact on their portfolio, and so they will try to, buy another lease, buy time for a pivot or a change. Venture partners do, keep each other honest in a partnership, right? If it's clear a company's going nowhere, but if one partner is really attached to it for one reason, the others will ultimately tell them, enough's enough. But it's pretty variable. I've had companies that have gone from near-death experiences to being very successful. I mean, we had at Pandora, back when the royalties were increased substantially at the last CRB ruling.
2006?
That would be
2007.
2000. No, that's later. No, I'm lousy with dates. It's about right. You know, we had that board meeting where we said, a little later than that, maybe 2008,
Okay.
we had that board meeting where we said, you know, if these royalties stand, this is not a viable business at any scale, and we are going to need to shut it down. And you start thinking, you know, if it ends up there, we need to. Fortunately, we only had a couple of million listeners back then, but they were all, loved the service, and they all started to contact their elected representatives, and there was quite a. And so that helped us, get Congress to put pressure on revisiting that decision ultimately.
Yeah.
But no, I think there are a lot of stories actually of companies that the pull the plug conversation happens,
Yeah.
and for whatever reason they get a new lease on life and continue and become very successful. So,
I think usually they've got some kind of cool proprietary technology that they believe could be repurposed, or like an Amazon, they believe the game is so big that it's worth sticking in there and paying your dues. Or in our case, it took us 5 years to get to profitability, but we could show that individual operations were profitable, and we could show a projection of how, if we had enough of those, we could become a profitable institution. So I think there are different ways that an investor can gain comfort that it's worth hanging in there. And they would probably all say we always hang in too long. That it's very difficult. You do become emotionally invested in things. I actually think for the entrepreneur, sometimes it's good to know when to let go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's your life. Fast failure is this concept that I think makes a ton of sense, which is try something but be smart enough. We're all taught as entrepreneurs, you got to be tenacious and chew through brick walls and never give up. Well, sometimes it's better to give up and start something else.
Yeah.
Or take what you've learned and apply it to some other field.
Yeah, I don't think failure is always a bad thing, or quitting something is always a bad thing. I really don't,
No, the situation that I think VCs and entrepreneurs both kind of dread is you've taken a bunch of venture money, committing towards some kind of an exit, but the company's just not successful enough to get to that exit, but it's not going out of business either because it's borderline break even, and it's kind of the Walking Dead thing where these companies just go on for years and years, and nobody can find the way to get the outcome they were hoping for.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't taken venture money, that might be just fine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you might be happy.
So VCs aren't looking for a certain percentage of growth every year, and if you're not hitting that percentage of growth, then they're going to step back.
There's no formula.
There's no formula. So, back to individual entrepreneurs, what shared traits do you think they have? And, people that are watching that are interested in entrepreneurship and moving forward with an idea, what should they have in place?
I think there are different qualities in different entrepreneurs, but usually there's passion and persistence. I was telling you the story about when I invested in Pandora. Tim Westergren, I was a partner at a venture firm at the time, and he was pitching, it was called Savage Beast at the time, and it was similar to the recommendation technology they have, but it was just licensed to other music sites to power them. And they had a couple big customers, AOL, but it was clear the business model wasn't going to work because they were only get 4 or 5 music sites big enough to pay them even maybe $1 million a year, and they would get those, and then there'd be no place for the company to grow beyond that, and that's not a venture fundable scenario.
Yeah.
But Tim was so passionate about what he was doing, and I liked him so much. I turned him down more times than anybody else in history. Every 6 months he'd call me up and say, "Can we get together again?" And just because I love the passion, and I'd get together with him, and by the 5th time or whatever, he showed me a prototype of an alpha version of Pandora. And I thought it was a long shot, frankly, is the honest truth. But it also was something that was a consumer-facing internet site, and the intention then was for it to be, to be subscription-based. But I thought, all right, this is something that if it does take off, could be big, because the number of consumers that enjoy listening to music is a very large thing. So, as I think I mentioned to you, I was writing that check. I thought I'm probably going to lose all of this money, but I just, I was really sold by Tim.
Yeah.
And that another lesson from that story too is that Pandora launched as a subscription service with 10 hours free. This is an example of how when the writing's on the wall, you've got to be nimble as an entrepreneur, because it launched as a subscription service. We had it got pretty hot fast in terms of people trying it, but after the 10 hours ran out, almost nobody was subscribing. They just weren't ready to get out their credit card and create a new billing relationship. That's always a point of friction in consumer services.
Yeah.
And so we decided literally a couple of weeks after the launch, we're just gonna let it run free. We're gonna incur the content costs, and it's clear that people like this, and we're gonna find a way to monetize it. And that was the start of what's been a rather crazy journey into an ad-supported media company.
You know what I think is
basically.
so interesting is, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, but it seemed to me that when Pandora shifted to mobile, that was really
Yes.
what changed everything. So you were prior to pretty much apps.
Oh, this was all web. We were, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. This is, I think, a lesson for entrepreneurs in general, is mobile is the wave right now, clearly. I think I might be slightly off on these numbers, but I think probably 14, 16 months ago, Pandora was 50-50 between web browser listening and mobile device listening, and now it's 80-20 mobile devices.
Wow.
And the growth rate of mobile is just, the web business is basically flat, and that's true for a number of other consumer internet-facing companies. I know it's the usage, certainly for any kind of an entertainment offering, has gone heavily mobile, and that's really where the action's at.
But it's an example of getting a concept, an idea together, even before this vehicle that really shot you to the moon existed, but working your way through that and keeping things going.
It's one mistake that entrepreneurs often make is they try to apply traditional market analysis to an emerging disruptive market, and when there is, you can't analyze a market that doesn't exist yet, or you can't analyze a market that's going to be transformed by this new disruptive technology or product. I'll give you an example. When we were doing Pro Tools at DigiDesign, had I sat down and done a traditional market analysis, I would have said, all right, there's 3,000 commercial recording studios. There's 1,000 commercial recording studios in the U.S. Of any scale. There's 3,000 people that call themselves full-time recording engineers. If we nail this product, we'll sell, 3,000 systems. That's the total addressable market size for this. And it turned out at the end of the day, the company's well over. I mean, a few years ago, it was well over 1 million systems sold. And what happened was the nature of the product and other digital recording products, transformed the activity. It's kind of like, before Photoshop, how many people were willing to build darkrooms in their house if they wanted to do photo retouching? Not a lot, right? But something like Photoshop comes along and it transforms an activity you'd like to do. So I like to look for things that say, is there an activity that's really compelling and powerful but really hard to do? And can you find a way? It's expensive or there's some impediment, and can you match make emerging technologies with that opportunity? Because most entrepreneurs are not going to be in a position to invest in long-term R&D to create fundamental disruptive, underlying core technologies per se. They're much better off looking for an opportunity, a product that doesn't exist, and matchmaking available technologies, pulling them together in a product. If you look at Pro Tools, we didn't make the DSP chips, we didn't make the hard drives, we didn't make the Macintosh. We just made the software that pulled it all together and took it to a new application.
Back to your question about what traits to entrepreneurship. First, I think they're not nearly as alike as the media world would like to make them out to be. Some are shy, some are extroverted and all that. But I do think there's a certain amount of audacity in thinking that I can create something that didn't exist. And I think that's the challenge there. Some people are so audacious and their confidence level is so high they do foolish things. But the thing that always draws me to entrepreneurs is just that sense that we can do this, we can make this thing happen. It's probably what someone who writes a novel is like. And I've always thought, I remember the guy who wrote Cold Mountain spent 10 years writing that. It was his first novel. And I thought, you've got to have a certain amount of faith that you are actually writing a novel and not just telling your wife you're writing a novel to take 10 years. And lo and behold, it was a magnificent piece of work. But it takes a certain amount of audacity to declare yourself as a fiction writer when you've never written a novel, and to work at it that hard. So I think that's something entrepreneurs tend to have.
I really like that.
And also think they don't like working for other people.
Yes, that is the common trait I see.
Which of course is why when you blend in venture capitalists who think that entrepreneurs are working for them sometimes, it's sometimes not a happy mix.
So from a VC standpoint, you're overall less interested in market research. Maybe I'm making a generalization, but you would base your some of your decisions on who you want to fund based on the charisma of the person, and based on, is there a need for this thing? Is that
the single biggest indicator of probable success
Yeah.
in a venture investment, in my experience, is people, and
Yeah.
not just one founder, but it's, often it's a small team, and you
Mhm.
see that the team has got a compatible set of skills or a complementary set of skills that they're well positioned. Because most as an entrepreneur, you've got to be prepared to go through a lot of mutation. It's amazing how few business plans you look at 5 years later and you just don't crack up laughing because they're so the reality played out so differently from the plan. That's the norm in my experience. And so really smart, great teams will adapt, and they'll mutate. They'll see the writing on the wall when the first customer engagement happens. I think there's a number of phases you go through, and you have to be adaptable and nimble, if nothing else in that role. So when I used to look at deals, there were some. I'll give you an example. I was at Venture Partnership IVP when we did Netflix, and I worked on it with another partner, Tim Haley, who's actually still on the Netflix board, and the DVD wasn't even successful yet as a format. There weren't that many DVD players, and the notion that people are now going to rent DVDs by mail instead of going to the Blockbuster that's on every corner in every town practically in
That was
America
audacious.
Yeah, it
seemed
was, yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And but Reed Hastings is a very compelling entrepreneur. He had been a successful entrepreneur before against the odds. And we were betting on Reed largely in that deal, but it still was really hard. This is even this is in '96 maybe. This is even before kind of the internet bubble when everything was getting funded, any crazy idea. So the bar was still pretty high, and that was a hard sale, but ultimately a good one.
How should a company be structured when they're first starting off? And I'm thinking, you probably don't want to front load the marketing side. Maybe you want to front load the development side of a company, or from a human resources standpoint, where should you put the effort?
I think at the earliest stage of a company,
Yeah.
I would find, if you're doing it as a lone entrepreneur, right, then it's a different process than finding a couple of co-founders and collaborating on it. But I think, bootstrap as much as you can, spend nothing on marketing early. I guess not every business is the same, but in general, the pattern I'll see is, try to validate the product idea, try to build a prototype, try to get it in front of, the type of customer you're going after, get some reaction. That will cause a major course correction, and you want that course correction to happen as early and as cheaply as possible, because that course correction might be, it's over already, right? And if the writing's on the wall, you should make that decision. So a lot of the companies I've seen be successful, they've got a couple of passionate founders that put a team together. They're typically not paying themselves in the early days, and they're just getting to that kind of minimum viable product concept.
Yes,
The lean startup approach. That's the model I've seen be most successful. And then there are successful entrepreneurs who have a repeat track record, who can go out to the investors who made a lot of money on them last time and easily raise money on a PowerPoint and start hiring day one and be off to the races. But that's not most
And hire some of the
entrepreneurs.
same people they worked with on the last 3 deals.
Exactly.
And so they've got it's almost like a film. When you make a film, you're hiring everyone new, but usually you've worked with them on 6 other projects.
The problem is if you're a first-time entrepreneur and you're trying to raise money, in my experience in venture firms, almost none of the deals we ever did ever just kind of came in the mail or across the transom. They're being introduced by somebody who's got a recommendation on this person as being a good potential entrepreneur. But it's tough getting that first deal off the ground if it's one that requires venture funding. And like I said, I would only take venture funding if you needed it for the type of business you're trying to do, and I'd take it as late as you can and postpone it in the process.
Brendan Mulligan is a good idea from San Francisco. Are you familiar with him? He's just done company after company, but even in different verticals. It's really impressive. I wanted to. This is a kind of a big one. The opportunities for entrepreneurs in the music industry right now. What areas do you see of growth moving forward, and what areas would you stay away from if you were to give somebody advice?
So I think this comes back to a point Roger was making earlier, is that I think the music industry has not been a good industry for venture capital funded large deals. But I do think that the opportunity space for more cottage industry entrepreneurial deals is great. I think you're obviously familiar with Topspin and some of these emerging tools that allow artist business partners to help artists succeed. And I think that if you're a smart young entrepreneur who loves music, that's where I would be looking today. So that, there's really a vacuum for, a lot of managers are never going to be great at understanding technology tools and understanding social media, et cetera. And I think there's a big opportunity for small agencies to be formed. We just see a gap there today. We work with a lot of big artists where they say, the first thing they say, okay, this looks compelling, is really interesting, I'd like to do it. I don't know how to do it. Who can I hire? And so I think the small agency opportunity is great. In terms of venture-funded music technology startups, there's a lot of activity around in apps these days, and a lot of it around casual music making, around tools that somebody who's not a trained musician can pick up and kind of quickly get some satisfaction out of putting some loops together and making some music. I haven't seen any of those monetize very well. There's a company called Smule, Sonic Mule, who has started with the Ocarina, and they've done a number of these casual music apps. They've actually been funded, and they seem to be doing reasonably well. I'm not sure how well, but the things to stay away from in general, unless you really have access to a lot of capital and you want a big audacious play, is things that require direct content licensing from the labels. Because the labels typically, will want advances, and you'll need to raise money. You're going to raise money that you're going to take a check from a VC and give it to a record label, and those have. And if you do manage to build a successful business that's profitable, then when it comes time to renegotiate that deal, I think the content owners generally believe that all the value is in the content and not in the technology or the distribution, and so. Those deals are always really tough. It's going to be really fun to see how Spotify plays out over time, because I think that's a great product. But they have these content and business model issues. We have issues even with statutory licensed content at Pandora with difficulty, problems controlling our costs. So those are really tough. So I would generally, unless you have all the means to go for a big audacious play, that's not the place to go.
So we're past our limit here, but I do want to take just a couple of questions that came in.
Sure.
Okay, so Al Andrew asked, what are the 3 most important factors influencing music industry business strategies? I'm not sure exactly how to answer that.
I think you can comment on some of the, big trends that are inevitable, right? Is, we are moving towards a streaming future.
Yes.
That is, no amount of anybody wishing it was different is going to put that toothpaste back in the tube, right? It's just going to happen. I think downloads have already peaked and are probably a declining, product type. And if you can go back 70 years and there was no physical pre-recorded music product, right? And so I think the thing that's happening there is that streaming services will grow. They will generate more and more. They will generate, the revenue they generate for artists will grow, but it will not be a replacement for the $15 plastic disc era. It just, the economics aren't there.
But it's more like an annuity as opposed to the one-time price.
You don't get paid at the initial product sale. You get paid over time through consumption. So you get a song someone loves and they stream it many times, and the economics can be comparable. But I think what that does mean for the industry and for artists is that you've got to cultivate multiple other revenue streams. And there's a very long history of fans being patrons of musicians in many different ways. And what you have to do is you need to connect with, you need to expose as many potential fans as possible to your music, get them in your funnel, so to speak, and over time serve them well. And they will tell you, they will find ways to if you create products for them to consume, you tour and you create merchandise, experiences, et cetera, then they will self-select over time for whether they're a $0 fan or a $10 fan or a $200 fan. And you just have to create the opportunity for them to do that and be great and engage them. And I think the problem right now is that there just aren't enough mechanisms in broad use for that direct to fan artist connection. But they're evolving, and So that's the opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs, is get out there and make that a reality. Make help musicians be more confident about connecting directly with their fans and inspiring their fans to support them directly.
I would also say it appears to me that in my youth, music was virtually a medium unto itself, and then MTV came along, and music was often embedded or accompanied by some compelling videography. I think now music is involved in almost all media and is very important in them. Witness video games, which really have created a huge sector of music creation and some compensation for musicians. It feels to me that trend is going to continue. That music is going to be more deeply connected to other media. I watch my own children who consume music now through YouTube. That's really one of their main sources of music, listening, whether they're watching what happens or not. But I think that the intersection through television, film, videography, games, other media feels like it's here to stay. Certainly the whole sync license dimension of monetizing an artist's work used to be really unusual and frowned upon, and now I think it's something people are pretty excited about.
With the movement towards streaming with YouTube and Spotify and Pandora, you have an interesting role in that. You're chairman at Topspin. You're on the board of Topspin, which has this great tool, which is an email for media collection device. So if we're moving towards streaming and MP3s are becoming less valuable, and that's kind of the second step in marketing. It's awareness and acquisition, getting a permission-based contact. As we move away from MP3s, what is going to be, and this is another question from somebody, what's going to take the place? The
download is less and less, has less perceived value. What's the benefit you're giving a fan? I do think, they will, artists will have to be smart about what products they're selling and what content or music or what they're using to acquire fans or acquire customers. In most industries, you spend money to go out and acquire a customer. I think in the case of music, the E4M, the emails for media, which has been great because it's a zero cost. Maybe they might have bought the music anyway, but maybe there's some opportunity cost. But generally, very low cost way to acquire a customer in a direct relationship. I think, you make a really good point. As that becomes less attractive, you're going to have to be creative about alternatives. Take a live show, for example. Maybe what you do is a live show that can't be purchased anywhere else, you give a download of that live show as an inducement to get an email. I think it's going to vary by artist. One of the things we've learned with Topspin is that the kinds of bundles of physical and digital goods and experiences and downloads and media that work for different types of artists with different types of fan base are highly variable. There is not one, you know this well, there's not one playbook for what kind of, or template for what kind of Topspin offer you should create for your type of fans. It's about the artist being, really perceptive and creative about what's going to work with their fan base.
Is there anything on the horizon that you can talk about with Pandora or Topspin in terms of new products or directions that the companies are going in?
Well, Pandora's a public company, so I can't tell you stuff that's not out in the open. But I do think that as the company has stated, one of the things we've got a very large audience now, and we would like to find ways to leverage that audience for artists' benefit, whether it's through more data for artists and more opportunities for us to become a way for artists to connect with their fans. I think that's one of the ways, frankly, in a business model of streaming where pre-recorded music, revenues may be smaller than they've been historically. That might be a way to really create opportunity for artists economically.
Well, thank you guys for joining. Peter, thank
you
very much. Roger,
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody for tuning in, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thank you very much.